When an elderly woman's power wheelchair dies outside Tom Henderson's struggling auto repair shop, he doesn't hesitate to stay late. In his dimly lit garage, he meticulously rewires the controls, refusing payment from the grandmother who reminds him of his own mother. The chair's restored hum and her warm smile are all the reward he needs. But fate has bigger plans. The next morning, a sleek private jet touches down behind his modest shop. Out steps the woman's son, a billionaire automotive magnate who's tracked down the mechanic who restored his mother's independence. Moved by such selfless kindness, he presents Tom with a life-changing gift, a state-of-the-art luxury car repair garage. Could a simple act of compassion really open the door to a whole new life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The red toolbox sat open on Tom Henderson's workbench, its scratched surface telling stories of 30 years in the trade. Each morning, as the sun crept over Mason City's modest skyline, Tom's calloused fingers would trace the worn edges of these tools, each one a gift from his father, each one carrying memories of lessons learned in this very garage. The morning light filtered through the shop's grimy windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tom had meant to clean them last weekend, just as he'd meant to fix the flickering fluorescent light in Bay 3. But there never seemed to be enough hours in the day, or enough dollars in the account to hire help. He pulled his father's old ledger from the desk drawer, its leather cover cracked with age. The columns of red ink stared back at him, a stark reminder of the mounting bills and dwindling revenue. 3 decades of honest work, of treating every car like it was his own, and still the numbers refused to add up. "Morning, Mr. Henderson." Jerry, the mail carrier, called through the open bay door. "Got your usual stack here." Tom managed a warm smile, though he knew exactly what that stack contained. "More bills, more notices, more reminders of the changing times." "Thanks, Jerry. How's that transmission holding up?" "Smooth as silk, thanks to you. Though I still feel bad about not being able to pay the full amount yet." "Don't you worry about that." Tom waved away the concern, just as he had for countless others over the years. "Just keep that mail coming and we'll call it even." As Jerry continued his route, Tom sorted through the envelopes. Electric bill, supplier invoice, bank statement, each one a small weight added to his shoulders. But it was the last envelope that made his heart sink. A notice from the city about upcoming mandatory modernization requirements for all auto repair facilities. He set the letter aside and walked to the wall where his father's picture hung, slightly crooked, next to their first business license. "What would you do, Pop?" he murmured, studying the familiar face frozen in time. His father had always said that a mechanic's worth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the trust of his customers. That philosophy had built this business, but in today's world of chain stores and quick service centers, it was becoming harder to keep the lights on with trust alone. The morning brought its usual parade of regulars. Mrs. Johnson with her '85 Buick that burned more oil than gas. Mr. Peters and his delivery van that needed constant alternator adjustments, and young Sarah from the diner who could only afford to fix one thing at a time on her ancient Honda. Tom treated each vehicle with the same care, each customer with the same respect his father had shown for 30 years before him. By midday, the summer heat had turned the garage into an oven. Tom wiped the sweat from his brow with a rag that had seen better days, leaving a streak of grease across his forehead. He was deep in the engine bay of a Ford pickup when he heard the familiar tap of a cane against concrete. "Tom?" Clara Watson's voice carried from the entrance. "You got a minute?" He emerged from under the hood, already knowing what that tone meant. Clara had been bringing her car here since before Tom could reach the pedals. Now, at 82, she was still fiercely independent, but living on a fixed income that stretched thinner each year. "For you, Clara. I've got 2. He pulled up the old metal stool his father had always kept for customers who needed more than just a repair. Clara settled onto it, her weathered hands clutching her purse. "It's making that noise again, the one that sounds like birds arguing." She paused, her eyes falling to the floor. "I know I still owe you for the last time, but let me take a look," Tom interrupted gently. He'd learned long ago that sometimes dignity was worth more than dollars. "I think I know just what those angry birds are trying to tell us." As he worked, Clara told him about her grandchildren, about the rising cost of everything, about how the neighborhood was changing. Tom listened, nodding at all the right moments, just as his father had taught him. When he finished, he wrote up the bill and then accidentally applied a senior discount that didn't officially exist. "Tom Henderson, you're too good for your own good," Clara said, her eyes misting slightly. "They don't make them like you anymore." He helped her into her car, watching until she turned the corner. The comment stayed with him as he returned to the Ford, wondering if that was his problem, being too much like his father in a world that had moved on. The tools in his father's old box still worked perfectly well, but the world seemed to want something shinier, something more digital, something less human. The afternoon sun cast different shadows now, and Tom found himself counting the hours. Until closing. Not because he was eager to leave, the garage had always been more home than his empty apartment, but because after hours was when he could focus on the special projects. The ones that wouldn't make money but needed doing all the same. Mrs. Peterson's garden cart that no one else would touch. The neighborhood kids' bicycles that kept breaking in new and creative ways. Old Mr. Garcia's lawnmower that probably should have been retired during the Carter administration. These were the moments his father had called investing in people. Tom smiled at the memory, even as he glanced at the stack of unpaid bills on his desk. Maybe you couldn't take goodwill to the bank, but some currencies were worth more than cash. At least that's what he kept telling himself as the sun began its descent over another day at Henderson's Auto Repair. The day had settled into that quiet period, between closing time and when Tom usually left the shop. He was wiping down his tools, another habit inherited from his father, when he heard the soft whir of an electric motor, followed by silence, then a frustrated sigh. "Oh dear." The voice was gentle, but carried a note of resignation that made Tom look up from his work. Through the garage's open door, he could see an elderly woman in a power wheelchair that had clearly given up the ghost. She sat there in the fading light, a small figure against the darkening sky, clutching a worn leather purse and what looked like an old photograph. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Tom called out, already reaching for his flashlight. "I certainly hope so," she replied, managing a smile despite her predicament. "Though I hate to bother you after hours. I'm Margaret Wheeler, and this contraption," she patted the armrest of her wheelchair, "has decided it's done enough work for one day." Tom approached, noting how the woman's silver hair caught the last rays of sunlight. She reminded him of his mother in her later years, right down to the way she held herself with quiet dignity even in distress. "I'm Tom Henderson. Let's get you inside first, and then we'll take a look at what's troubling your chair." As he helped guide the now dead wheelchair into the shop, Margaret pulled the photograph from her purse. "My Harold used to say there's no such thing as coincidence," she said, holding out the picture. "He was a mechanic too, you see." The photograph showed a younger Margaret standing beside a tall man in coveralls, both of them beaming in front of what looked like a service station. From the 1960s. "Harold's Service and Repair," Tom read from the sign in the background. 43 years he ran that shop, Margaret said proudly, until his heart gave out one spring morning while he was helping a stranded tourist fix their radiator. She tucked the photo away carefully. He always said it was a good way to go, doing what he loved, helping someone in need. Tom knelt beside the wheelchair, his diagnostic instincts already kicking in. "Do you mind if I ask what happened before it stopped working?" "It started making this terrible grinding noise about 2 blocks ago," Margaret explained. "Then everything just went quiet. I was trying to get to my daughter's house. She lives over on Maple Street. But I suppose even machines get tired sometimes." As Tom began his inspection, Margaret continued to share stories about Harold and their life together. How they'd raised 3 children while running the shop, How Harold had insisted on teaching their daughter basic car maintenance, even though it wasn't ladylike in those days. How he'd kept a jar of candy on the counter for customers' children, just like the one Tom's father had maintained. "You know," she said, watching Tom work, "Harold would have liked you. He always said you could tell a good mechanic not by how fast they found the problem, but by how carefully they looked for it." Tom smiled, reminded again of his own father's similar wisdom. He'd located the issue, a failed control module complicated by some corroded wiring. But the real challenge would be finding a way to repair it. Modern power wheelchairs weren't designed to be fixed. They were designed to be replaced. "Mrs. Wheeler." "Margaret, please." "Margaret, I think I can fix this, but it might take a little while. I'd be happy to call someone for you," or she waved away his concern. "If you're willing to stay late, I'm happy to wait. It's not often I get to spend time in a proper repair shop anymore. Besides," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "I want to see if you're as good as Harold was." As Tom gathered his tools and prepared to tackle the wheelchair's electronics, Margaret settled into the old customer stool, her presence filling the shop with a familiar comfort. She pulled out a small album from her purse and began sharing more photographs. Harold teaching their son James how to change oil, their daughter's first car repair, the day they finally paid off the shop's mortgage. "James runs some big automotive company now," she mentioned casually, "all because his father insisted he learn the business from the ground up. Though I sometimes wonder if he remembers those early lessons about putting people before profits." Tom worked steadily, listening to Margaret's stories while carefully tracing circuits and replacing corroded connections. The work was delicate, requiring the same patience and precision he used on vintage car electronics. As the evening deepened, the shop's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their familiar glow over this unexpected meeting of kindred spirits. It was strange. Tom thought how the universe sometimes arranged these moments. Here he was, struggling to keep his father's legacy alive, while Margaret shared stories of a man who had faced the same challenges in a different era. Each photograph, each memory she shared, seemed to reaffirm why he did what he did, even as the stack of bills on his desk suggested he was fighting a losing battle. The night grew older, but neither of them seemed to notice. Margaret's stories and Tom's careful work created a bubble of timelessness in the old garage, where the values of a bygone era still held true, and the simple act of fixing something broken could bridge generations of shared understanding. The wheelchair's control panel lay open before Tom, its circuitry a maze of modern complexity, masked beneath sleek plastic. He'd seen plenty of electronics in his day, but power wheelchairs were different. They weren't just machines, they were lifelines. Every wire, every connection represented someone's independence. The trouble with modern equipment, Tom explained, carefully tracing a circuit path, is that they don't want you to fix it. Everything's sealed up tight, marked with no user serviceable. Parts inside. He glanced up at Margaret. "Your Harold would have had something to say about that, I bet." Margaret chuckled softly. "Oh, he'd have given quite the sermon. He used to say that anything made by human hands could be fixed by human hands. You just had to be patient enough to learn its language." Tom nodded, understanding exactly what Harold had meant. Each machine did have its own language, its own way of telling you what was wrong if you just listened carefully enough. The wheelchair's control panel was speaking to him now, through corroded traces and worn connections. "Would you like to know what I see here?" Tom asked, gesturing to the circuit board. When Margaret nodded, he continued, "See these traces here? They're like roads on a map, carrying electricity instead of cars. Over time, moisture's gotten in and corroded some of these roads, creating detours and roadblocks. That's why your chair stopped responding. Just like arteries can get blocked. With age?" Margaret observed, leaning forward with interest. "Exactly like that. And just like with health, sometimes the solution isn't replacing everything. It's carefully clearing the pathways and strengthening what's already there." As Tom worked, delicately cleaning connections and reinforcing weak points, Margaret shared more about her life. She spoke of the challenges of aging, of watching the world speed up while her own pace necessarily slowed down. The power wheelchair had been a concession to reality, but it had also become her key to remaining active in her community. "I volunteer at the library 3 times a week," she explained, "reading to children. Can't manage the old wooden stepladder anymore to reach the high shelves, but with this chair I can still be useful. The children don't care that I have to sit while I read. They just care about the stories." Tom paused in his work, struck by the parallel to his own situation. "It's funny," he said, "how sometimes the things that seem like limitations end up connecting us to what matters most." "That's wisdom speaking there, Tom Henderson. Sounds like something your father might have said." Tom smiled, surprised by how well she'd read him. "He did say something similar, actually, when arthritis started making it hard for him to work. On smaller parts, he said it was God's way of telling him to train the next generation. He carefully soldered a new connection, spent his last few years teaching more than fixing, said it was the best work he'd ever done." The night deepened around them as Tom continued his careful repair work. The familiar sounds of the shop, the hum of the lights, the soft click of tools, the distant traffic, created a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. Margaret shared stories of her own children growing up in Harold's shop, of the lessons learned there that went far beyond mechanics. "James was always the quickest to learn," she recalled, a hint of both pride and sadness in her voice. "Could diagnose an engine problem just by listening by the time he was 16. Harold was so proud, but somewhere along the way," she paused, searching for the right words. "Somewhere along the way, I think James forgot that the most important repairs aren't always the ones you can see." Tom understood. He'd seen it happen before, talented mechanics who got caught up in the business side, forgetting that every car that came through their doors represented someone's daily struggles, someone's hopes, someone's needs. As he worked on the final connections, Tom found himself sharing his own struggles with Margaret. The mounting bills, the changing industry, the pressure to modernize or close down. It felt natural somehow to open up to this woman who carried herself with such gentle wisdom. "You know what Harold would say about that?" Margaret asked, her eyes twinkling. "He'd say that sometimes the good Lord sends us problems just so we can help each other solve them, though I suspect he borrowed that wisdom from someone else." The clock on the wall showed well past midnight when Tom finally closed up the control panel. He'd not only repaired the original problem, but had reinforced several other weak points he'd found. Future problems prevented before they could strand Margaret somewhere less safe than outside his shop. "Let's give it a try," he said, stepping back as Margaret settled her hands on the controls. The chair hummed to life, responding smoothly to her touch. The smile that lit up her face made the late hours more than worth it. "It hasn't run this smoothly in years," she marveled, executing a small turn. "How much do I owe you, Tom?" Tom shook his head. "Nothing. Consider it my contribution to the library's storytime program." Margaret fixed him with a knowing look. "Harold used to try that too. Didn't pay the bills then, either." She reached into her purse, but Tom held up his hand. "Tell you what, promise you'll stop by again sometime. Share more stories about Harold's shop. That'll be payment enough." Morning light had barely begun to filter through the shop's windows when Tom heard it, a sound entirely foreign to Mason City's quiet industrial district, the deep, distinctive rumble of jet engines. He was in the middle of his morning routine, coffee in one hand and yesterday's receipts in the other, when the noise grew loud enough to rattle the framed certificates on the wall. Setting down his cup, he stepped outside, shielding his eyes against the early sun. The sight nearly knocked him backward. A sleek Gulfstream jet was touching down on the wide service road behind his shop, its pristine white surface reflecting the morning light like a mirror. The road, normally reserved for delivery trucks and the occasional tow service, had become an impromptu runway. A business card fluttered down from somewhere above, landing at his feet. The paper was thick, expensive, with raised silver lettering that caught the light. James Wheeler, CEO, Wheeler Automotive Industries. Tom picked it up, his mind struggling to connect the dots between last night's repair and this morning's surreal arrival. The jet's door opened with a pneumatic hiss, extending a set of stairs. A man emerged, tall, precisely groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Tom's monthly revenue. He moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and closing deals. "Tom Henderson?" The man's voice carried easily across the distance, warm but authoritative. "I'm James Wheeler. I believe you met my mother last night." Tom stood rooted to the spot, the business card still in his hand. This was Margaret's son, the boy who'd learned mechanics at his father's knee, now transformed into a titan of industry. The contrast between Margaret's humble wheelchair and this display of wealth was staggering. James Wheeler descended the stairs, followed by two assistants tapping away at tablets. He approached Tom with an extended hand and a smile that had probably closed billion-dollar deals. "I hope you'll forgive the dramatic entrance. When Mum called this morning to tell me about you, I was in Detroit. I had my pilot divert immediately." Tom shook the offered hand automatically, noting the smooth palm and manicured nails, hands that hadn't turned a wrench in years. "Your mother? She called you about a wheelchair repair?" "She called to tell me she'd found someone who reminded her of Dad." James's expression softened slightly. "Do you know how rare that is? Mom's met hundreds of mechanics over the years, but you're the first one she's compared to Harold." The assistants had positioned themselves discreetly nearby, their tablets poised. James seemed to read Tom's questioning glance. "Don't mind them. They're here to document everything, force of habit in my business. Speaking of which," he gestured toward the shop. "Mind if we take a look around?" Tom led the way into his garage, acutely aware of every oil stain on the concrete, every scratched tool cabinet, every outdated piece of equipment. James moved through the space with familiar ease, his eyes taking in everything. He paused at the old photograph of Tom's father. "Mum showed me a picture just like this," he said softly. "Dad in front of his first shop. Same proud stance." He turned to face Tom. "You know, she told me you spent hours on that wheelchair repair, refused to take payment too." "It wasn't about the money," Tom replied, feeling defensive, though he wasn't sure why. "No," James agreed, surprising him. "It never was with Dad either. That's what made him special. It's also what nearly bankrupted him 3 times before he figured out how to balance doing good with doing well." He ran a finger along a workbench, studying the decades of honest wear. "Mom said you've got the same problem." The assistants were moving through the shop now, taking photos, making notes. Tom watched them uneasily, wondering what kind of documentation required such thoroughness. "Mr. Wheeler." "James, please." "James, why are you really here?" The CEO smiled, reaching into his jacket to produce another business card, this one different from the one that had fallen from the sky. "Because, Tom Henderson, I believe in signs. And when my mother calls me at dawn to tell me she's found someone who works like my father, cares like my father, and struggles like my father," he handed Tom the card. "Well, let's just say I've learned to pay attention to such things." James Wheeler pulled a rolled-up set of blueprints from one of his assistants and spread them across Tom's workbench, weighing down the corners with spare parts. The fresh blue lines and crisp computer rendering stood in stark contrast to the worn wood beneath. "What you're looking at," James said, his finger tracing along the elegant design, "is the future of Henderson's auto repair. Or rather, what could be its future." Tom leaned in, studying the detailed drawings. The blueprint showed a modern facility that somehow managed to maintain the character of his current shop while expanding it into something entirely new. Large bay windows replaced the grimy ones. State-of-the-art lifts stood where his aging equipment now sat, and a training center occupied what was currently empty storage space. "I don't understand," Tom said, though part of him was beginning to. "Mom told me something interesting this morning." James continued, straightening his Italian silk tie. "She said that when she showed you that old photo of Dad's shop, you looked at it the same way he used to look at his dreams, like you could see the potential beneath the problems." He paused, studying Tom's reaction. "That's a rare quality these days." One of the assistants stepped forward with a leather portfolio, which James opened to reveal a thick document. Wheeler Automotive Industries isn't just about manufacturing parts or selling luxury cars. We're about preserving what works while innovating what doesn't. And sometimes, Mr. Henderson, what works best is the old-school approach to customer service and community involvement, just updated for modern times. Tom's eyes moved between the blueprint and the contract, his mind racing. "You want to buy my shop?" "No," James smiled. "I want to invest in it. Transform it into a flagship location for a new division of Wheeler Automotive, one that combines high-end service with community outreach and technical training. Everything state-of-the-art, but run with the same values that both our fathers believed in." The proposition hung in the air like a physical thing. Tom could almost see his father's reaction, equal parts excitement and skepticism. "Why me?" James walked to the wall where Tom's father's picture hung. "Because when my mother's wheelchair broke down, you didn't see a late-night inconvenience. You saw someone who needed help. You didn't rush the job or inflate the price. You took the time to do it right and then refused payment." He turned back to Tom. "That's exactly how my father would have handled it, and that's exactly the kind of principle I want to build this new venture on." One of the assistants produced a tablet showing figures that made Tom's head spin. The initial investment would cover complete modernization, staff expansion, and a training program for young mechanics. You'd retain operational control, but with access to our resources, supplier network, and marketing expertise. Tom's hand traced over the blueprint, feeling the smooth paper beneath his calloused fingers. The design incorporated everything he'd ever dreamed of but could never afford. The training center for young mechanics, the community service bay, the modern diagnostics equipment. But something made him hesitate. "And what happens to my current customers, the ones who can barely afford repairs as it is?" James's expression softened. "Mum said you'd ask that." He pointed to a section of the blueprint labeled Community Service Center. "This space here, it's specifically designed for subsidized repairs for elderly and low-income customers. Part of our corporate social responsibility program, tax-deductible and publicity-friendly." He smiled. "Dad always said the best business solutions are the ones where everybody wins." Tom looked around his shop, at the worn tools that had served him and his father faithfully, at the old coffee maker that had brewed thousands of cups for waiting customers, at the jar of candy that still sat on the counter for customers' children. Everything here told a story of service, of community, of putting people before profits. James seemed to read his thoughts. "We're not looking to erase history, Tom. We're looking to build on it. Take what made this place special and give it the resources to help even more people." He pulled another document from the portfolio, a preliminary budget. Sometimes doing good and doing well don't have to be mutually exclusive. That evening, after James Wheeler's jet had departed and the dust had settled, Tom sat alone in his office, staring at his latest bank statement. The numbers hadn't changed since morning, but somehow they looked different now. Less like a death sentence for his father's legacy and more like a crossroads. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered, "Mike's Parts." "Mike, it's Tom Henderson." "Tommy, did you call to tell me you're finally ready to retire and sell me that prime real estate of yours?" The old parts dealer had been half joking about buying the shop for years. "Actually, I need some advice." Tom leaned back in his chair, the ancient springs creaking in protest. "You remember my father pretty well, don't you? Jack Henderson? Hell, Tommy, your old man was the best mechanic this side of the Mississippi. Taught me everything I know about reading people, not just parts catalogs. Tom smiled at the memory. What do you think he'd say if someone offered to turn his shop into something bigger, something more modern? There was a pause on the line. This isn't hypothetical, is it? Someone made you an offer. James Wheeler. Wheeler Automotive Industries. Mike whistled low. The luxury car people? Tommy, that's not an offer. That's a miracle wrapped in a winning lottery ticket. But what about the principles Dad built this place on? The people who depend on us? Tom's eyes drifted to the old family photo on his desk, taken the day his father had first opened the shop. What about his legacy? Your father's legacy isn't in the building, Tommy. It's not in the tools or the sign over the door. It's in how you treat people. Mike's voice softened. Remember what he always said about tools? Tom nodded, though Mike couldn't see him. A good tool helps you do the job better. A bad tool makes you wish you had a good one. Exactly. Maybe this Wheeler offer is just a better tool to do what you're already doing. Helping people. After hanging up, Tom walked through his darkened shop, running his hands over familiar surfaces. Each workbench, each cabinet, each piece of equipment held memories. He could almost hear his father's voice explaining the intricacies of engines, the importance of precision, the value of integrity. He paused at the candy jar on the counter, the same one his father had kept filled for 30 years. Inside was a folded piece of paper he'd discovered after his father's passing. In his father's careful handwriting, it read, "The secret isn't in fixing cars, it's in fixing people's trust in other people." Tom pulled out the contract James had left, reading it again under the soft glow of his desk lamp. The terms were more than fair. They were generous. Wheeler Automotive would provide everything, new equipment, training resources, marketing support, but they would also preserve the Henderson name and, more importantly, the Henderson way of doing business. Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if this was too good to be true? What if, despite James's assurances, the soul of the place got lost in corporate policies and profit margins? What if he let down not just his father's memory, but all the people who counted on him? He thought of Margaret Wheeler and her stories about Harold's shop, how similar their struggles had been, the balance between helping people and staying afloat, between preserving the old ways and adapting to the new. Harold had found his way through those challenges. Maybe this was Tom's chance to do the same. The decision wouldn't come easy. It would mean change, big change. But as he looked around at his aging equipment, at the stack of unpaid bills, at the growing list of repairs he couldn't properly handle without better tools, Tom realized something. Sometimes preserving a legacy meant letting it evolve. The contract lay on Tom's workbench, its crisp pages stark against the oil-stained surface. James Wheeler sat across from him, his suit jacket now draped over a nearby chair, a small concession to the informal atmosphere of the garage. Between them sat Margaret, who had insisted on being present for what she called the joining of two legacies. "I've made some notes," Tom said, pulling out a carefully written list. The yellow legal pad paper was smudged with a few greasy fingerprints, but his writing was clear and deliberate. "Before we sign anything, I need to make sure we're absolutely clear on a few points." James leaned forward, genuine interest in his eyes. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "First," Tom began, "Clara Watson and her garden club friends. They're all on fixed incomes, and they've been coming here for years. I need a guarantee that we'll still be able to help them at rates they can afford." Margaret's eyes crinkled with approval as James reached for the contract. "We can add a specific clause about maintaining reduced rates for seniors and long-term customers." "What else?" "The apprenticeship program." Tom tapped his pencil on the pad. "I want to make sure it's not just about teaching kids how to use diagnostic computers. They need to learn the fundamentals, how to think through problems, how to listen to engines, how to treat customers like family." James smiled, glancing at his mother. "Mom said you'd bring that up. Take a look at Section 12. He flipped to the relevant page. "We've already included provisions for a comprehensive training program that combines traditional mechanical skills with modern technology. In fact, we'd like you to help design it." Tom nodded, moving down his list. The name stays Henderson's, not just on paper, but in spirit. This can't become one of those places where everything's about upselling and rush jobs. That's actually why we want you, Tom, James said, his tone serious. Look, I could buy any garage and fill it with the latest equipment, but what made my father's shop special, what makes your shop special, is the relationship with the community. That's not something you can buy. It's something you have to build day by day, repair by repair. Margaret reached over and patted Tom's hand. He means it, Tom. James may wear fancy suits now, but he learned the trade the same way you did. From a father who believed in doing things right. Tom looked down at his final point, the most important one. Your father's shop, he said to Margaret. What happened to it after he passed? A shadow crossed her face, but she answered steadily. It was sold. The new owners turned it into one of those quick lube places. 15-minute oil changes, air fresheners hanging from every mirror. She shook her head. Harold would have hated it. That's not going to happen here, James said firmly. Mom made me promise that before she even told me about your shop. This isn't a takeover, Tom. It's a partnership. We provide the resources. You maintain the heart of the operation. Tom stood up and walked to his father's photo. Dad used to say that progress isn't about throwing away the old ways. It's about finding new ways to keep them alive. He turned back to face James and Margaret. I'll sign, but I want one more thing added to the contract. Name it, James said. Every year, we set aside a portion of the profits for a community fund. Emergency repairs, help for people down on their luck, the kind of things my father used to do quietly when nobody was looking. James didn't hesitate. Done. We'll call it the Jack Henderson Memorial Fund. As the lawyers were called in to make the final adjustments, Tom caught Margaret wiping away a tear. Harold would be proud, she whispered. Both of them would be. The signing itself was almost anticlimactic. A few strokes of a pen, transforming decades of history into a blueprint for the future. But as Tom wrote his name beneath the Henderson's Auto Repair logo one last time as sole owner, he didn't feel like he was letting go of his father's legacy. Instead, he felt like he was giving it wings to soar into a new era. The construction permits were taped to the shop's front window, their official stamps and signatures making everything feel suddenly, irrevocably real. Tom stood in the early morning light, watching as the first construction crews began unloading their equipment. Behind him, his father's old shop was about to undergo its most significant transformation in 50 years. You okay, Mr. Henderson? Jenny Martinez, his longtime customer and local diner owner, asked as she walked up beside him. She'd brought coffee for the crews, a gesture that perfectly embodied the community spirit Tom was so determined to preserve. Just taking it all in, he replied, accepting a cup from her. Feels a bit like watching your kid leave for college. You know it's the right thing, but it's still hard, she finished, understanding in her voice. We've all seen the plans you posted in the waiting area. It looks amazing, but... She hesitated. But you're worried about the changes, Tom said gently. The prices mostly, Jenny admitted. That fancy new equipment has to be paid for somehow. Tom turned to face her fully. Jenny, remember last month when your delivery van's transmission was slipping? And we worked out that payment plan? She nodded. That kind of arrangement isn't ending. In fact, he pulled a preliminary brochure from his pocket, something James's team had designed. Take a look at this. We're expanding our community assistance program. The construction foreman approached with a clipboard full of permits, drawing Tom's attention. Mr. Henderson, we need to discuss the phasing plan. We can start with the back bays, keep the front operational for a few weeks longer. Tom nodded, appreciating how they'd structured the renovation to minimize disruption to his regular customers. The plans called for the work to be done in stages, allowing him to continue serving the community, albeit at a reduced capacity. Throughout the morning, more regulars stopped by, drawn by the activity. Old Mr. Peterson hobbled over from his house across the street, his weathered face creased with concern. Mrs. Johnson parked her oil-burning Buick at the curb, watching the proceedings with visible anxiety. Each one carried the same unspoken question. Would there still be a place for them in this gleaming new future? Tom took time with each of them, explaining the changes, showing the plans, emphasizing what would stay the same. He kept his father's photo prominently displayed on an easel near the blueprints, a visual reminder that while the walls might change, the foundation remained solid. By midday, the construction crew had sectioned off the back of the shop, and the sound of demolition filled the air. Tom watched as the first wall came down, revealing layers of history, old insulation, forgotten posters, paint colors from decades past. Each revealed layer was like a chapter in the shop's story. "It's like surgery," Margaret observed, having arrived in her newly serviced wheelchair to witness the transformation. "Sometimes you have to cut away the old to heal properly." She had positioned herself near the blueprints, happily explaining to anyone who would listen how the new layout would actually make the shop more accessible for elderly customers. The most poignant moment came when they had to temporarily take down his father's old sign. Tom insisted on handling it himself, carefully unbolting the weathered metal, his hands trembling slightly as he lowered it to the ground. The sign would be restored and incorporated into the new design. James had been adamant about that, but seeing it come down still felt momentous. "Your father believed in building things to last," Margaret said softly, watching him wrap the sign carefully in protective blankets. "Not just cars or buildings, but relationships, trust, community. That's what you're preserving here, Tom. The rest is just window dressing." As the day progressed, something unexpected began to happen. Customers who had initially come to voice concerns started rolling up their sleeves to help. Jenny brought lunch for the entire crew. Mr. Peterson shared stories about the shop's early days with the architects, helping them understand the soul of the place they were reimagining. Even Mrs. Johnson's grandkids showed up after school, excited to see the big machines at work. The transformation was becoming not just a construction project, but a community event. Tom realized that while he had been worried about preserving his father's legacy, the community had already taken ownership of it. They weren't just customers, they were stakeholders in this new chapter of Henderson's Auto Repair. The management training manual sat open on Tom's new desk, its pristine pages filled with flowcharts, procedures, and corporate protocols. Next to it, his father's old ledger provided a stark contrast, coffee-stained and dog-eared, but filled with the simple wisdom of notes about customers' lives, not just their cars. "Inventory management system giving you trouble again?" Sarah, his newly hired service coordinator, asked from the doorway. She'd been sent by Wheeler Automotive to help modernize their operations, and despite her youth, she had a knack for reading Tom's expressions. "Just trying to figure out how to input Mrs. Johnson's special circumstances into the computer," Tom sighed, gesturing at the screen. "The system wants a standard payment plan, but she pays what she can when her social security check comes in. Sometimes it's more, sometimes less." Sarah pulled up a chair. "Here's a trick the manual doesn't cover." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, creating a custom category. "We'll call it the Henderson Flexible Payment Plan. That way, we keep the personal touch while still maintaining proper records." Tom smiled, reminded of how his father used to create similar workarounds in his old ledger. The new system had its advantages. Inventory was automatically reordered, customer histories were instantly accessible, scheduling was more efficient. But sometimes it felt like trying to fit a lifetime of handshake agreements into digital boxes. Margaret wheeled in, bringing her usual warmth and perspective. She'd taken to visiting regularly, becoming something of an unofficial ambassador between the old way and the new. "Having another technology battle?" she asked, noting Tom's furrowed brow. "Just learning to speak a new language," he replied, showing her the screen. "Your son's systems are impressive, but sometimes I miss just writing things down in the ledger. Harold felt the same way when we first got a cash register, Margaret chuckled. Insisted on keeping his notebook totals alongside the printed ones for a full year. But you know what? The register gave him more time to spend with customers instead of counting change. The morning's first customers began arriving, and Tom watched through his office window as Sarah gracefully managed the new digital check-in system. She had a way of making the technology feel friendly, showing elderly customers how their repair updates would now come directly to their phones, helping younger clients download the shop's new app. But it was more than just new technology. Wheeler, Automotive, had sent a full training program, thick binders that covered everything from advanced diagnostics to employee management. Tom had spent evenings poring over them, determined to honor both his father's practical wisdom and James's modern vision. Mr. Henderson, one of the new mechanics, fresh from technical school, appeared at his door. "Could you come take a listen to something? The computer's showing a timing issue, but it doesn't sound quite right to me." Tom followed him to the service bay, where a car sat under the new LED lights. The young mechanic started the engine, and Tom closed his eyes, listening to its rhythm. This was where the old ways still proved invaluable. No computer could replicate decades of experience, of knowing an engine's song by heart. "See, the diagnostic says it's the timing belt," the mechanic explained, pointing to his tablet. "But the sound tells a different story," Tom finished, nodding approvingly. "This is why we don't just trust the computers. Let me show you what your ears are trying to tell you." For the next hour, Tom demonstrated how to combine the computer's data with old-school diagnostic techniques. The young mechanic's eyes lit up with understanding, and Tom felt a familiar warmth, the same one his father must have felt when teaching him. Later, reviewing the day's reports on his new dual monitors, Tom realized something. The technology wasn't replacing the personal touch. It was freeing up time to make that touch more meaningful. The computers handled the routine tasks, letting him focus on what mattered most. Teaching the next generation, solving the complex problems, and maintaining the relationships that had always been Henderson's true foundation. Sarah popped her head in one last time before leaving. "By the way, I added a notes field to every customer profile for all those little details that make Henderson special, kids' names, preferred appointment times, which ones need a reminder call instead of a text. The things that aren't in the manual." Tom looked at his father's photo on the wall, then at the modern office around him. Perhaps this was what progress really looked like, not replacing the old ways, but building on them, using new tools to carry old values forward. The competitor's advertisement glared from the local newspaper. "Stay local, stay loyal. Don't let big corporations steal our community's soul. Family-owned Max's Auto Service, where you're still treated like a neighbor, not a number." The not so subtle jab at Henderson's recent transformation was impossible to miss. Tom sat in his office, coffee growing cold as he studied the ad. Max had been a friendly competitor for years. They'd even helped each other out during busy periods, but the Wheeler partnership had clearly changed the dynamics of their relationship. "Have you seen the flyers they're putting on windshields?" Sarah asked, placing one on his desk. The paper promised 20% off any service for former Henderson's customers, with a tagline that read, "Remember when your mechanic knew your name, not just your account number?" The irony wasn't lost on Tom. Just yesterday, he'd spent an hour with old Mrs. Peterson, explaining how her arthritic hands could use their new automated payment system, making sure she felt comfortable with the changes. The personal touch hadn't disappeared, it had evolved. "They're scared," Margaret observed from her usual spot near the window, where she liked to watch the shop's daily operations. "Change frightens people, especially when it threatens their way of life. Max sees your new equipment, your expanded services, and he sees his own mortality." Before Tom could respond, Jenny from the diner burst in, clearly agitated. "Tom, you need to hear what they're saying at the coffee counter." She dropped into a chair, her usual cheerful demeanor clouded with concern. Max's people are telling everyone you're going to start charging Wheeler automotive prices once you've driven out the competition. They're saying the community program is just temporary, a corporate trick to what? To help people? Tom stood up, moving to his father's old photo. Dad used to say that rumors are like engine noise. They usually point to something that needs attention. He turned to Sarah. What are our actual prices compared to Max's? Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet on her tablet. On average, we're within 5% of their rates, sometimes lower, thanks to our bulk purchasing power through Wheeler. And that's not counting our community assistance program, which helps more people than ever. Tom nodded slowly, an idea forming. You know what else Dad used to say? The best way to fight bad information is with good demonstration. He grabbed his jacket. I need to pay Max a visit. The drive to Max's shop took less than 10 minutes. The familiar building, with its faded sign and gravel parking lot, reminded Tom of how Henderson's used to look. Max was under a car when Tom arrived, just visible legs sticking out from beneath an old Chevrolet. Got a minute, Max? The creeper rolled out, revealing Max's grease-stained face. His expression hardened slightly at the sight of Tom. Come to check out the competition? Come to invite you to lunch, actually. Tom held up a paper bag. Jenny's sandwiches. Remember how we used to split them during busy days? The simple gesture seemed to deflate some of Max's defensiveness. They ended up sitting on old shop stools, unwrapping the sandwiches in familiar silence. You're worried, Tom said finally. I get it. I was too, when James Wheeler first showed up. Thought we'd lose everything that made us special, haven't you? Max asked, but the anger had been replaced by genuine concern. All that corporate shine, those fancy computers. Come see for yourself, Tom offered. Not as a competitor, as the neighbor you've always been. Watch how we actually operate. Meet our trainees, talk to our customers. If you still think we've lost our soul, I'll understand the ads. Max studied his sandwich. And if I don't, then maybe we can figure out how to be better neighbors again. This town needs both our shops, Max. Different customers, different needs. Tom leaned forward. In fact, I've got a proposal for you. Wheeler's Parts Network, our training resources. They could be available to you too, not as a takeover, but as a partnership. Keep your independence but gain some advantages, like a small shop alliance. Exactly. Compete on service, not survival. Dad used to say there's no shortage of cars that need fixing, just a shortage of trust in who fixes them. The tension in Max's shoulders eased slightly. Your old man was smart that way. He was quiet for a moment. I'll come by. No promises, but I'll come look. As Tom drove back to Henderson's, he reflected on how his father would have handled this situation. The answer was right there in the shop's history. Build bridges, not walls. Fight fear with familiarity. Show, don't tell. When he returned, Sarah was waiting with an update. 2 customers called to cancel their appointments, cited Max's discount offer. Tom smiled. Call them back. Tell them we'll match Max's discount and add free winter maintenance checks for their families. Not because we're competing, but because they're part of our community, always have been, always will be. He glanced at his father's photo. The best response to competition wasn't to fight fire with fire, but to demonstrate why people trusted Henderson's in the first place. One customer, one repair, one relationship at a time. The negative review glowed harshly from Tom's computer screen. This isn't the Hendersons I knew. Waited 2 hours past my appointment time. Young mechanic seemed more interested in his tablet than my car. When did they stop caring about people? Corporate takeover ruined another local business. The words hit Tom like a physical blow, especially because Mrs. Anderson, the reviewer, had been bringing her cars to Henderson's for 20 years. Her late husband had played poker with Tom's father. This wasn't just a customer complaint. It was a breach of generational trust. Tom, Sarah stood in the doorway, her usual confidence dimmed. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. Behind her, he could see 2 of the new mechanics in heated discussion. their voices just low enough that he couldn't make out the words. The shop had been struggling with growing pains. The new diagnostic systems were efficient but complicated. The expanded staff meant more personalities to manage. The increased customer flow was straining their ability to maintain the personal touch that had always been Henderson's hallmark. "Walk me through it," Tom said, pushing away from his desk. Sarah led him to the service bay where Mrs. Anderson's car had been worked on. Jake was handling the diagnostic work, but he got conflicting readings from the new system. Instead of asking for help, he kept running the tests over and over. Meanwhile, the appointment schedule backed up. "Where was David?" Tom asked, referring to their experienced senior mechanic. "That's part of the problem." Sarah lowered her voice. "The younger guys, they think David's old-school methods slow them down. They've been avoiding asking him for help." As if on cue, David emerged from under a nearby car, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Tom, got a minute? We need to talk about these new procedures." The frustration in David's voice was clear. He'd been with Henderson's for 15 years, and Tom could see how the changes were wearing on him. The new technology was supposed to make things easier, but somehow it had created a divide between the old guard and the new generation. "Break room," Tom decided. "Sarah, could you grab Jake and Mark too? We need to clear the air." In the break room, the tension was palpable. Jake, fresh from technical school, sat with his tablet while David leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Mark, another new hire, seemed more interested in his coffee than the conversation. "Mrs. Anderson's review," Tom began, pulling it up. On his phone. "Let's talk about what went wrong." "The new system," Jake started. "The lack of basic diagnostic skills," David interrupted. "Stop." Tom held up his hand. "This isn't about pointing fingers. This is about remembering who we are." He walked to the break room window, gesturing at the shop floor. "You see that? Lift in Bay 3. That's where my father taught me how to listen to an engine, not just scan it, listen to it, feel it, understand it." He turned back to the group. "Jake, you're brilliant with the new technology. David, your experience is irreplaceable. But somewhere between the old way and the new way, we've stopped talking to each other. And more importantly, we've stopped listening to our customers." Sarah spoke up. "The appointment system is efficient, but maybe we've let it make us rigid. Mrs. Anderson used to come in for coffee and chat while her car was being serviced. Yesterday she sat alone in the waiting room for 2 hours. Tom nodded. "The computers, the diagnostics, the procedures, they're tools, important tools, but they're not what makes us Hendersons." He pulled his father's old business card from his wallet, worn and faded. "Dad used to say that every car that comes through those doors carries someone's hopes, fears, and trust. Whether it's getting to work, picking up kids, or making deliveries, people depend on us to keep their lives running." "But the new systems require," Jake began. "The new systems require us to be better," Tom finished. "Not just technically, but as people. David, would you be willing to mentor Jake and Mark? Show them how to combine their technical skills with your experience?" David straightened. "Been waiting for someone to ask." "And Jake, Mark, would you be willing to teach David more about the new systems? Make it a two-way street?" The younger mechanics exchanged glances, then nodded. "Sarah, let's revise the scheduling, build in some buffer time. Make sure we're not just processing appointments, but taking care of people." Tom looked at each face in turn. "We're not choosing between old and new. We're finding a way to be both. That's what my father would have wanted. That's what Henderson's has always been about." The meeting ended with a new sense of purpose, but Tom remained in the break room, staring at his reflection in the window. The crisis had revealed something important. Modernization wasn't just about updating equipment and procedures. It was about bringing people together, bridging generations, and maintaining the human touch that had always been Henderson's true strength. Tom stood in his office early one morning, holding his father's old work gloves. The leather was cracked and worn, shaped by decades of honest work. He'd found them in a box while reorganizing, and now they served as a tangible reminder of what Henderson's had always been about. Morning meeting in 5 minutes, Sarah reminded him, pausing at his door. Everyone's here early, like you asked. Tom nodded, still holding the gloves. Let's have it in Bay 1 today, not the conference room. The staff gathered in the service bay, David, Jake, Mark and the other mechanics, Sarah with her tablet. Even the front desk staff. Tom placed the old gloves on a workbench where everyone could see them. These were my father's, he began. He wore them every day for 30 years. Each crack, each stain, each repair tells a story about fixing cars and helping people. He picked them up again. Yesterday I had a long talk with Mrs. Anderson. The team shifted uncomfortably, the negative review still fresh in their minds. She didn't come to complain more. She came because that's what Henderson's customers do. They give us a chance to make things right. We spent 2 hours talking, not just about her car, but about how this place has been part of her family's life for decades. Tom pulled out a fresh pair of work gloves from behind his back. So today, we're going back to basics. Jake, you're working with David on Mrs. Peterson's Buick. No tablets until you've diagnosed it by hand and ear. David, while Jake's learning, from you, he's going to show you how the new diagnostic system could have caught that transmission problem last week sooner. He turned to Mark. You'll be with me. We're going through every step of customer interaction, from greeting to farewell. Sarah's developed a way to blend our traditional service cards with the new digital system. Sarah held up her tablet. We've created custom fields for all the personal notes we used to keep in the cards. Kids' names, preferred appointment times, special circumstances. The technology should enhance our relationships, not replace them. Tom gestured to the shop. Around them, look at this place. Yes, we have new equipment. Yes, we have modern systems. But under all that, we're still Hendersons. That means every customer who walks through that door isn't just an appointment number. They're part of our story. He picked up a clipboard. Today's schedule has been adjusted. We've built in time for proper teaching, for double-checking our work, for actually talking with our customers. It might mean fewer appointments, but it'll mean better service. David stepped forward, reaching for the old gloves. I remember your father wearing these. He could tell what was wrong with an engine just by laying his hands on it. And now we have sensors that can do the same thing, Jake added, but without his usual tech pride. Maybe we could use both. Exactly, Tom smiled. Mrs. Anderson's coming back today. Jake, you'll handle her car, with David supervising. Show her how our new technology helps us take better care of her car, but also take the time to listen to her stories about playing poker with my dad. The morning progressed with a different energy. In Bay 1, David showed Jake how to diagnose problems using all his senses before confirming with the computer. In Bay 2, Mark learned the art of customer conversation while inputting data into their new system. Sarah moved between them, helping blend the old methods with the new tools. Tom watched as Mrs. Peterson arrived for her appointment. Instead of heading straight to the new customer lounge with its coffee bar and Wi-Fi, she was invited to watch the diagnostic process. Jake explained each step, both the traditional checks and the modern tests, while David added insights from years of experience. You know, Mrs. Peterson said, this reminds me of how Jack used to walk me through everything he was doing, except now I can see it all on that screen too. By day's end, the shop had serviced fewer cars than their new schedule usually demanded. But something fundamental had shifted. The younger mechanics were asking David questions about engine sounds and vibration patterns. David was letting Jake show him shortcuts in the diagnostic software. The personal notes in their digital system were growing richer with each customer interaction. Tom placed his father's old gloves back in their place of honor on his desk, next to the modern dual monitors. They would serve as a daily reminder that progress wasn't about choosing between old and new. It was about bringing out the best in both. The community newsletter lay fresh off the printer on Tom's desk, featuring Henderson's new apprenticeship program on the front page. The headline read, "Local auto shop bridges generation gap, opens doors to future mechanics." Below it was a photo of Jake teaching a high school student how to use both traditional tools and modern diagnostic equipment, with David looking on approvingly. "The first class starts next week," Sarah said, placing a stack of applications on his desk. "We've got 15 students signed up, including 3 from the women's technical program at the community college." Tom smiled, remembering his father's words about how a garage wasn't just a place to fix cars, it was a place to build futures. The apprenticeship program had been his idea, but Wheeler Automotive had embraced it enthusiastically, seeing it as a model for other locations. Mrs. Wheeler's been calling it the Harold Wheeler Memorial Apprenticeship Program, Margaret announced, wheeling into the office. She'd become a regular fixture at the shop, often sharing stories with customers. In the newly redesigned waiting area, James says it's exactly the kind of community involvement his father would have wanted. The program wasn't the only way Henderson's was reaching out. Tom had worked with Max's auto service to establish a shared emergency response system for after-hours breakdowns. Instead of competing, they were coordinating their resources to ensure no one in the community was ever stranded. Speaking of community involvement, Sarah pulled up a calendar on her tablet. The local high school's auto shop teacher called. He's wondering if we could host their class next month, show them what a modern garage looks like. Set it up. Tom nodded. And call Max, see if he wants to be part of it. His expertise with classic cars would be perfect for showing how automotive technology has evolved. The shop had found its rhythm in recent weeks. The blend of old and new approaches had created something unique, a place where traditional values met modern efficiency. Customers often found themselves watching their cars being serviced on modern lifts while listening to David share stories about similar repairs he'd done decades ago. Jenny from the diner poked her head in. "Tom, got a minute? I've had an idea about those Saturday morning car care clinics you mentioned." The clinics had been another way of giving back. Free basic maintenance workshops for anyone in the community. But Jenny's expression suggested something more. "What if we combined them with a community breakfast?" she proposed. "I could provide coffee and pastries, you provide the knowledge. Make it a real community event." Tom glanced at the old photo of his father on the wall. "Dad used to say the best conversations happened over coffee and carburetor talk." The idea quickly evolved. The first breakfast and basics session was scheduled for the following month, with topics ranging from basic car maintenance to understanding modern vehicle technology. Max agreed to contribute his expertise on classic cars and several other. Local businesses wanted to participate. The initiative caught James Wheeler's attention. During his next video call, he expressed interest in implementing similar programs across their network. "This is exactly what we hoped would happen," he said. "You're not just preserving the Henderson legacy, you're expanding it." One morning, Tom arrived early to find an elderly gentleman examining the apprenticeship notice in the window. "My granddaughter's interested," he said when Tom approached. "But I wasn't sure, being a girl." Tom invited him inside, introducing him to Sarah, who was now leading their technical training program. As she explained the opportunities available, Tom watched the man's hesitation transform into enthusiasm. "Things sure have changed," the man remarked later, "but somehow this place still feels like the Hendersons I remember from 30 years ago." "That's because some things don't change," Tom replied. "The tools might be different, but caring about people never goes out of style." The community's response continued to grow. Local schools began incorporating visits to Henderson's into their vocational programs. The Saturday clinics became so popular they had to add a second monthly session. Even the local paper ran a feature about how the shop had managed to modernize, while strengthening its community roots. But perhaps the most telling sign of success came from Mrs. Anderson, whose negative review had sparked their return to basics. She now regularly brought her grandchildren to the maintenance workshops, proudly telling anyone who would listen how Henderson's had found a way to embrace the future while honoring its past. The local business award gleamed under the shop's lights, its crystal surface catching and reflecting the morning sun. Excellence in community impact. Henderson's auto repair was etched into its base, along with a quote that made Tom's throat tight every time he read it. "Where tradition meets tomorrow, perfect spot for it," Margaret said, watching as Tom placed the award next to his father's photo. Harold would have loved that inscription. She dressed up for the occasion, wearing the brooch Tom's father had once complimented at a community dinner decades ago. The award had come as a surprise. The Chamber of Commerce had created a new category, specifically to recognize businesses that managed to modernize while maintaining their community connections. Henderson's had won unanimously. The committee was particularly impressed by the apprenticeship program, Sarah reported, reviewing the judges' comments on her tablet. They said it's rare to see a business innovation that serves both economic and social needs so effectively. The recognition had brought James Wheeler himself to town. He stood now in the customer lounge, engaged in animated conversation with Max about the potential for expanding their collaborative emergency response system to other communities. "You've created something special here, Tom," James said, breaking away from his conversation to join them. "The board's talking about making this a model for all our affiliated shops. They're calling it the Henderson approach." Tom shook his head, still amazed by how things had evolved. "It's not just us, it's the whole community." Max's expertise with classic cars, Jenny's hospitality at the workshops, the local school's involvement, everyone's contributed. As if on cue, the first Saturday morning workshop participants began arriving. The session had grown far beyond basic car maintenance. Today's topic was understanding modern hybrid systems, but Tom knew that, as usual, the real value would come from the conversations that happened around the technical instruction. Mrs. Peterson shuffled in with her granddaughter, who was now one of their apprentices. Behind them came Mr. Garcia, who'd recently started teaching Spanish classes for the staff after discovering some of their Hispanic customers felt more comfortable discussing technical issues in their native language. "Tom," David called from the service bay, "think you might want to see this." In the bay, a familiar vehicle sat on the lift, the same power wheelchair that had started everything, though now it was running smoother than ever thanks to regular maintenance from their newly established mobility assistance program. "Thought it was fitting to have it here today," Margaret smiled. "A reminder of how simple acts of kindness can spark remarkable changes." The morning's workshop began with something new, a joint presentation by Jake and David demonstrating how traditional diagnostic skills complemented modern technology. The audience watched, fascinated, as David diagnosed an engine issue by sound and touch, followed by Jake showing how the computer confirmed his assessment and provided additional details. "This is what we mean by where tradition meets tomorrow," Tom explained to the group. "It's not about choosing between old and new, it's about bringing out the best in both." During the coffee break, Tom overheard two older mechanics from another shop talking. "Never thought I'd see it," one said. "A corporate-backed shop that still feels like family." The award ceremony had made the local news, and a reporter had asked Tom the secret to their success. He'd thought about it for a moment before answering. "We just remembered that every tool, whether it's a wrench or a computer, is only as good as the heart behind it." James had liked that quote so much, he'd included it in his presentation to the Wheeler Automotive Board. Now, watching the diverse group of people filling his shop, students and seniors, tech experts and traditional mechanics, long-time customers, and new faces, Tom understood what his father had meant about a garage being more than just a place to fix cars. The award caught the light again, sending ribbons of reflection across the shop floor. But it was the living proof of their success that meant the most to Tom. The apprentice confidently explaining a diagnostic readout to an elderly customer, David and Jake collaborating on a complex repair, Sarah introducing new scheduling software that somehow made their service feel even more personal. "You know what this really means?" Margaret asked softly, gesturing to the award. "It means Harold and your father were right all along. Taking care of people never goes out of style. It just finds new ways to express itself." The new Power Wheelchair Program brochure sat fresh on the counter, its glossy pages showcasing Henderson's latest community initiative. What had started with Margaret's broken wheelchair had evolved into something far more significant: a dedicated service department for mobility equipment, staffed by specially trained technicians who combined mechanical expertise with genuine compassion. 3 more certifications came through this morning, Sarah announced, adding the framed documents to their growing wall of credentials. "We're now the most comprehensive mobility equipment service center in the county." Tom watched as Jake guided, an elderly veteran through the maintenance process for his motorized scooter. The young mechanic, who had once been wholly focused on computer diagnostics, now moved with the gentle patience that had always characterized Henderson's best work. "Remember when he couldn't look up from his tablet?" David chuckled, coming to stand beside Tom. "Now he's teaching our new apprentices about reading people as well as reading diagnostic codes." The shop had found its rhythm in ways Tom hadn't imagined possible. The modern equipment and traditional values didn't just coexist, they enhanced each other. The computer systems that had once seemed impersonal now helped them track and anticipate their customers' needs with unprecedented attention to detail. Margaret wheeled in, accompanied by a group of seniors from her residential community. "Ready for today's tech workshop?" she asked brightly. The monthly sessions, teaching older adults how to use their vehicles' modern features, had become incredibly popular, breaking down the barrier between generations and technology. Mr. Henderson, a young apprentice, approached, carrying a tablet. "The community service tracking system you asked for is ready. We can now monitor all our outreach programs and identify where we might be needed most." Tom followed her to the computer, where she demonstrated how they could now track everything from the mobility equipment program to their emergency assistance services. The data helped them serve better, but it was the stories behind the numbers that mattered most. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from James Wheeler, who had flown in to see their community programs in action. He stood in the training area, watching as a group of high school students learned about hybrid vehicle maintenance. "You've exceeded every expectation," James said quietly. "When we first discussed modernizing Henderson's, I thought we were just updating a repair shop. Instead, you've created a community hub that other businesses want to emulate." Tom smiled, remembering his initial fears about losing the shop's soul to corporate efficiency. "We just figured out that the best way to honor tradition was to help it grow." The proof of that growth was everywhere. In one corner, Max from the competing garage was conducting a classic car maintenance workshop, his expertise now a valued part of Henderson's educational program. Jenny from the diner had set up a permanent coffee station in the waiting area, creating a space where customers actually enjoyed spending time. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came later that afternoon. Mrs. Anderson, whose negative review had once sparked their return to basics, brought in her grandson's first car for a safety check. As Jake performed the inspection, she shared stories about the shop's history with other waiting customers, becoming an unofficial ambassador for the Henderson way. "You know what your father would love most about all this?" Margaret asked, watching the scene unfold. "It's not the new equipment or even the programs. It's how you've made sure that everyone who comes through those doors feels like they belong here." The day wound down with a staff meeting where Tom unveiled their latest initiative, a scholarship program for aspiring mechanics funded by a portion of their increased revenue. "We're not just fixing cars anymore," he explained to the team. We're building a legacy that will keep giving back to this community. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the spotless service bays, Tom stood in the doorway of his father's old office, now a modern command center that somehow still maintained its welcoming warmth. The computer screens displayed service, schedules, and diagnostic data, while the walls held both technical certifications and fading photographs of customers from decades past. A young apprentice was the last to leave, pausing to straighten a chair in the waiting area, a small gesture that showed how deeply the Henderson values had taken root in the next generation. This, Tom realized, was the true measure of their success, not just in the services they provided, but in the values they perpetuated. The mentorship certificate hung proudly on the wall of Henderson's training center, its fresh ink marking the completion of their first full year of the program. Below it, a photo showed their inaugural class of graduates, a diverse group of young faces beaming with pride, each holding their own certificates of completion. "They're calling it the Henderson's generation," Sarah said, showing Tom an article on her tablet about their apprentices being sought after by shops across the state. "Apparently, having Henderson's training on your resume is becoming quite the advantage." Tom watched through the window as David worked with their newest group of apprentices. The veteran mechanic had found his true calling in teaching, sharing not just technical knowledge, but the wisdom that could only come from decades of experience. Today, he was demonstrating how to blend traditional diagnostic techniques with modern technology, a Henderson's signature approach that had become their hallmark. "You've created something remarkable here," Margaret observed from her usual spot near the training area. She'd become a beloved figure to the apprentices, sharing stories about Harold's shop and the evolution of automotive repair. These young people aren't just learning a trade, they're inheriting a philosophy. The shop had evolved into something that felt like a cross between a modern repair facility and a teaching hospital. Every bay was equipped with both state-of-the-art technology and experienced mentors. Customers often found themselves included in the educational process, learning about their vehicles while watching the interaction between seasoned mechanics and eager apprentices. Jake, once the tech-focused newcomer, now led the advanced diagnostic training sessions. But his classes always started with the basics, listening, observing, and understanding the human side of automotive repair. "Technology is just a tool," he'd tell his students, echoing Tom's father's wisdom. "It's how you use it to help people that matters." The morning's activities were interrupted by an unexpected visit from James Wheeler, accompanied by his board of directors. They moved through the shop, observing the unique blend of traditional craftsmanship and modern efficiency that had made Henderson's a model for their entire network. "The board has approved your expansion proposal," James announced during a brief meeting in the conference room. "But they want to know your secret. How have you managed to grow while keeping the personal touch that made Henderson special?" Tom thought for a moment, then led the group to the training center. An apprentice was working with an elderly customer, patiently explaining the maintenance requirements for her hybrid vehicle while inputting the information into their digital system. "This is our secret," Tom said quietly. "We're not just passing on skills, we're passing on values. Every person who trains here learns that the most important tool in the shop isn't in the toolbox or on the computer, it's in how you treat people." The board members watched as David demonstrated the art of diagnostic listening to a group of students, while nearby, Sarah showed another group how to use their customer relationship software to track not just maintenance schedules, but personal details that made each client feel valued. "We're not training mechanics," Tom continued. "We're training caretakers of people's trust, their safety, their independence. That's what my father understood, what Harold Wheeler understood, and what we're making sure the next generation understands." Later, that afternoon, Tom found himself reviewing applications for their next training cycle. The stack was larger than ever, including candidates from across the country who had heard about the Henderson's way of blending old-world values with modern expertise. The shop's reputation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. Other businesses in town had started adopting their community-focused approach. The local community college had approached them about creating a certified training program. Even Max's Auto Service had become an enthusiastic partner in their educational initiatives. "Your father would be proud," Margaret said softly, wheeling up beside his desk. "Not just of what you've built, but of what you're passing on. Harold always said that the true measure of success isn't in what you achieve, but in what you inspire others to become." As if to emphasize her point, the sound of laughter drifted in from the shop floor. David was sharing one of his legendary stories about impossible repairs and innovative solutions. His audience a mixture of apprentices, customers, and staff. In that moment, Tom could almost hear his father's voice joining in, adding his own wisdom to the legacy they were building. The keys to the new building gleamed in Tom's hand as he stood before the gathered crowd. The morning sun caught the Henderson's Auto Repair and Training Center sign, its modern design somehow managing to echo the spirit of his father's original, hand-painted version. "Some of you might remember when this was just a small garage with 2 bays and a coffee maker that never quite worked right," Tom began, drawing knowing chuckles from the long-time customers in the audience. "My father used to say that a good mechanic fixes more than just cars. They fix trust in human kindness." Margaret sat in the front row, her wheelchair now maintaining a permanent place of honor as the catalyst that had started it all. Beside her, James Wheeler nodded appreciatively, understanding how a chance encounter had transformed not just Henderson's, but the entire Wheeler automotive approach to community-based service. The new building stood as a testament to what was possible when tradition and progress worked in harmony. The service bays were equipped with the latest technology, but each still had the personal touches that made customers feel at home. The training center housed both computer labs and hands-on workshops, while the community space hosted everything from technical classes to senior citizens' coffee mornings. "This isn't just a new building," Tom continued, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "It's a promise to our community, a promise that no matter how much we grow, no matter how much things change, the heart of Henderson's will always be about people helping people." As he cut the ribbon, Tom caught sight of his father's photo, now prominently displayed in the main entrance alongside Harold Wheeler's. 2 men from different generations who had understood the same fundamental truth, that true service meant treating everyone who walked through your doors like family. The keys in his hand weren't just to a building. They were to the future of everything his father had built, everything Margaret and Harold had inspired, and everything the next generation would carry forward. In the end, it had never really been about fixing cars. It had been about keeping dreams running, one person, one act of kindness at a time.